Some of those are barriers to digital learning, and you're going to hear a lot more about that over the course of the day as we hear about the digital learning now elements of effective policy and how states are doing against those. Those would all help clear the way for this kind of movement. But then also all of the rigid teacher policies we have that limit how many students a great teacher can reach, class size limits, limits on how much a great teacher can be paid, and so forth. And then finally, as policymakers, we really need to be thinking about how can we increase the will of education system leaders to reach every kid with excellence. And we're still in a country where you guys on the stage have to fight an enormous battle just to get districts to evaluate their teachers every year, which is a pretty basic element of management. We need a much stronger willpower on the part of districts and schools to reach every kid with excellence. And how to do that, we're not sure, but it needs to be something bold, like financial rewards for success, so that if districts and schools and teachers do well, they get paid a lot more. Or what about a new civil right to excellent teaching, so that districts have to provide an excellent teacher and therefore have to use these kinds of technology approaches and other redesigns to reach every child with an excellent teacher, or something else. But I think we need to be thinking about these bolder methods to increase the will and get away from the model we have, which really locks in a situation where only a small number of kids have excellent teaching.
Those are great points. I always like to remind folks that we talk about teachers having the ability to close the achievement gap, but it's only about 15% of all teachers in the workforce who have that exemplary skill. And a child's odds of being assigned a great teacher, that teacher in a year, is 1 in 7. But to close the achievement gap, you need that great teachers year in, year out for 5 years at least. So it's more like 1 in 17,000 a chance a child has of being assigned those great teachers year in and year out. So those are really important reminders of the uphill battle we have to face. Let me ask, we're going to go to, if you want to line up with the mics, anybody who has a question, I just have one more point to make, and that is, we do studies of districts, and we're looking at one particular right now in one of your states. And it's a state that really has discouraged, it's really and reinforces the notion of seniority-based layoffs. And they've gotten around it by, this district has gotten around it by hiring all new teachers on 1-year contracts. So when the year is up, all new teachers get laid off. All first-year teachers, second-year, third-year teachers are all being laid off. And all the veteran teachers are keeping their jobs. So we think that's a little interesting way around a state law. So I just sort of wondered if any of you have put a system in place that would prevent such a thing from happening.
Yeah, I would have to maybe refer to Jason down here, who's the architect, if you will, of the details of the legislation. But the way it is written, I don't think that is. I don't think that local districts could twist our law to find that kind of a loophole and that kind of way out of not having the seniority issue. So I don't think that scenarios would be legal in Idaho based on the laws we've passed. All right.
Kimberly?
In Illinois, we created a grouping process for streamlining dismissal of teachers, and so there's 4 groups, and the groups is based on your performance evaluation. So regardless if you're a new hire teacher or a tenure teacher, you fall within a group based on your evaluation, your incompetency, which it took us about 3 weeks to define the word incompetence, and based on your relevant experience. So those are the factors that goes into grouping the teachers, and then that is what ultimately decides on whether or not their teacher will be put on a layoff list. And seniority only plays a role as it relates to the tiebreaker in those categories.
Erik?
In our bill, by the time that the entire implementation of it takes effect in 2014, that will be an impossibility. You will not be able to.
Because it was your state, I'll just be honest.
It was. And here's what's interesting, and I don't know if you were referring to my state or not, but immediately after we passed our comprehensive teacher reform bill in May of this year, And over the summer, the Broward School, one of our school districts in Florida, which is actually the school district, or at least the county, that I probably got the most email from while I was passing this bill. They had, like every single school district, they had budget shortfalls. So they had to get rid of over 1,400 or 1,500 teachers all at once. And what was interesting was that they got rid of, every single one of the teachers they got rid of were all their first, second, and third year teachers that were not on tenured contracts. And what happened, and this is probably the last year they're going to be able to do that, because by the time that our bill comes into full implementation, you will not, all your dismissal practices will be based on performance, not on seniority. But what was interesting about that is that there was a silver lining to it. As sad as it was having that many teachers dismissed, all of a sudden I start getting emails from Broward parents telling me, you know what, for the first time I actually saw the value in the bill that you passed, because my son or my daughter just lost the best physics teacher in their high school simply because of the fact that he or she had only been there for 3 years, and they kept around a teacher that everybody was avoiding because of the fact that they were tenured. So that really brought to light to a lot of parents who were originally opposed to this. So I don't know if it was my state that you were referring to, but it certainly happened in that school district. But I can tell you by 2014, it'll never happen again.
But let's be clear, though. You're not dismissing someone who's on a one-year contract.
Right. That's absolutely right. But if you're going to dismiss anybody at any point, you're going to dismiss them. If you have to do cutbacks based on the law that we passed, or dismissals, it's going to have to be based on that performance, that 50% evaluator of, were you highly effective, were you effective, or were you highly ineffective?
Okay. All right, let's go to questions.
Good morning, everybody. My name is John Raymond, and I just want to say this is the most exciting educational reform or education panel and or session I've ever been a part of, so thank you so much. I'm a former teacher. I taught for 6 years, and I just want to say that I think private schools have it right. I taught in independent schools in the Northeast, these hoity-toity boarding schools and such, and basically one-year contract, 30-year dismissal terms for any reason, doesn't have to be explained. And that keeps us on our toes. So I don't know if that's feasible in a public school environment, but I just wanted to mention that. I now work with public schools. I'm the owner of a company called Power IT, and I'm leading my question. Power IT makes web-based software for managing the teacher evaluation process. Representative Fresen, you talked a little bit about implementation. And one of the stumbling blocks we see with implementation is the problem around the fact that most principals are doing drive-by evaluations right now, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Let's just say it's an hour per principal per teacher. And you're moving to a system that's going to involve potentially 6 observations, some of which are full class observations, 3 meetings a year with this teacher. We're talking about preparation for those meetings, paperwork afterwards, and so forth. I see a potential bottleneck that's forming, all right, with respect to implementation. Are we at the point where we're talking about this issue yet, or is that something that's going to really take place, like Dr. Bennett said, at the local level?
Well, let me answer this. First of all, I think we are forgetting a very important piece here. Let's talk about school performance. We're here talking about teacher performance, but when you're figuring in growth, and I would ask you to connect these dots, when you consider growth as a factor of school performance, and you have an A school, does it make sense you have mostly pretty good teachers in that school? Now, if you have a consistently poor performing school, like an F school, which is what we call them, does it make sense that you have 90, 95% effective and highly effective teachers? So I think the first thing a principal ought to do is first take a look at their school data. Because that's the first reality check. I think one of the big mistakes we've made in this process is not connecting professional performance to building performance. If anything good comes out of the teacher effectiveness discussion, it should be that there is a direct correlation to the quality of the professionals who work in the building to the performance of the building. So I think some of the bottleneck you can almost start thinking yourself through as you take a look at how your building performs.
Can I just jump on that real quick, because I want to make sure we get time for questions. We all know how critical it is that we have a great leader in every school. So what we did is we looked at our policies and we said if we want a great principal in every school, we want to hold principals accountable, then give them control over what we're holding them accountable for. Another piece of the reform is now principals in Idaho, they can reject a teacher that they're trying to move from one school to another. They get to decide who their staff is. And coming from the business sector, that was one of the things that surprised me, was how little control principals have over who are teaching in their classrooms and who shouldn't be there, yet then we want to hold them accountable. So now principals in Idaho, they don't have to accept a transfer from another school. They don't have to accept somebody that the district has hired and said, this person's going to teach in your school. They have the veto right, if you will. And I think that's going to raise their level of leadership, because now they have control and a higher level of accountability.
What's driving this to the local level? You can use TAP. You can use mentor teachers, master teachers to evaluate teachers. It doesn't have to all fall on the shoulders of that one person called the principal.
Okay, let's have the next question. And it should be a question.
Good morning. My name is Chris Hansen. I'm a state representative, vice chair of education on the House Education Committee in Montana. And Montana is well behind the curve in school choice. We have no charter schools. We have no school choice whatsoever. We lost out on Race to the Top dollars because our our superintendent said, we will never support charter schools in Montana. Just flat out said no. Same sorts of issues with the unions so when Montana, like Superintendent Luna said, when Montana does this, we need to do it all at once and big, because we can't pick around the edges. We get clobbered all the time. But what I'm hearing here is we're looking, like Bryan said, we're at 20-25% excellent teachers. But what I've been looking at and noticing in Montana is also that the university system, which is creating our new teachers, is way behind also. Yeah. The curriculum that we're teaching the teachers is weak. It's lame, it's weak, there's no teeth to it. We've got elementary teachers who are taking the philosophy of teaching. They're not learning how to teach, and the university system is not producing good teachers. Is anybody looking at that? Have you considered it yet? And what do
I wear Kevlar on a regular basis. These guys think they...
Higher ed loves you, don't they, Kay?
They love me. They love me. We're producing a rating of all the ed schools in the United States with U.S. News and World Report next year, and the ed schools have organized quite a little challenge against it.
Kate, may I speak to that for a moment?
Yes.
Being a legislator and you from Minnesota also being a legislator, you brought up two important things, that your superintendent said no flat out for charter schools, and that your union representation was not willing to move on some things. I think legislative strategy is really important for the state of Minnesota. I know in Illinois we have this bad rap as being the wild, wild west state, and we pretty much hold ourselves up to that reputation in some ways. But for me, you have to bring all the education stakeholders to the table and begin the discussions. You can exclude the superintendent for right now, but you need the union groups, you need the reform groups, you need the parent groups, and you need the associations that represents the superintendents, the school board administrators, and the like, so that you guys can sit at the table and decide what type of framework do we want to build together as a team. What worked in Idaho might not work in Minnesota. What works in Illinois may not work in Minnesota. But what will work for your system, your structure? This gentleman in Florida said they had like 60-something odd school districts. Well, in Illinois, we have over 800 school districts, and Chicago being just one. So as this bill was being negotiated, we had a new mayor coming on. Our former mayor was retiring after so many years. He played a major role. You have to accommodate the governor and the four tops of leadership. But what I found helpful is that we have an agreed bill process. And so that bill process says, as stakeholders from the legislature, being both Democrats and Republicans, we worked together on this, and we came to the table with all of those stakeholders. They had separate proposals, and I created a system where we put their proposals on one sheet and we had them look at themselves to see you're not as far off as you think you are. The arguments are old, they're outdated, where we have 90% of our teachers ranked excellent, but yet we have over 80% of our schools on the felon watch list. There was no consistency there. And so I believe you need to start there as a legislator in identifying who your education stakeholders are in your state, bring them to the table, and begin to draw on what ideas that they believe would move your state forward, and then begin to go back to the governor's office and say, hey, can we get your support on this proposal that all of these stakeholders have come together on as a team? If the 80-20 rule may work for you. If you have 80% of your education stakeholders agreeing on issues, then move on them. If the superintendent will come along, if he's getting pressure from the rest of the state on we need to do this, the superintendent will come along. So I just would encourage you to start legislative strategy for Minnesota based on what would be good for Minnesota. And
I think it was Montana. Actually.
Was it Montana? Oh, I'm sorry, Montana, but same applies for Montana. and good luck.
Just a quick point to that, and just to dovetail off my colleague from Illinois, I agree, bring all the stakeholders to the table, try to have the comprehensive conversation. I would just tell you, legislators strategically, while you're having those conversations, in case they fall apart, just get to 50 plus 1%. And both the chambers, try to find colleagues of yours, because at some point you may find that initial step to reform so obstructive that you're never going to get everybody to agree to something. So you may just need a couple bold legislators, colleagues of yours, to be able to get that first step, and then from there kind of start the conversation. To the point of the colleges of education, and it was a great point of what they're teaching. During breakfast, I was having a conversation with one of our State Board of Education members, and we were talking specifically about that, whether or not even the concept of a college of education is outdated. And here's why. You have models like Teach for America, for example, right, which is coming into public high schools and public middle schools and having incredible results. And these are just students, literally, didn't study in colleges of education for the most part, studied in other fields, and just came in with a passion to teach, and they're achieving incredible results. So just that little kind of microcosm of what's happening in certain areas in Florida. I know Teach for America is active in Chicago public schools, and they're active in Florida. Most of those kids that are participating in that program don't come from colleges of education, yet they're achieving incredible results in the classroom. So perhaps it's time to have that discussion of whether A, colleges of education by themselves are outdated, or B, if we have to completely reform what they're teaching and just get more to a subject content-based delivery of teaching those teachers so that they can actually teach something outside of the philosophy and the pedagogy of teaching, and move more towards what actually is effective for a student to learn.
I actually disagree with him, but I'm not supposed to do that now. So, go ahead, sir.
Hi, Larry Sen, president of the California Teachers Empowerment Network. I have a question, mostly, I guess, for Dr. Bennett, although obviously anybody can answer it. You were talking before about how change should always be at the local level, and I couldn't agree with you more. But what do you do in a state like California, which has an ed code, which probably couldn't fit into the average moving van, which is guarded like a mother hen by the California Teachers Association, the 325,000 strong California Teachers Association? What to do? How to proceed?
Well, I wish I had the right answer for you, because Indiana, while we probably aren't quite as extreme as California, I think our legislators here would tell you that prior to 2011, the Indiana State Teachers Association ran the House of Representatives in our General Assembly. Okay, so we had a similar issue, and I think we have to fundamentally, and I know this is cliche-ish, and this is poor juvenile rhetoric, but you know what you got to say? Show me how your plan is better for children than my plan. I'll buy your plan. We would tell teachers that every day. I will buy your plan if you can show me how what you're doing and what you want to do is better for children than what we want to do. See, I think part of the problem is we don't walk out with a plan. We did exactly what Idaho did. We walked out with a comprehensive plan. Most expansive voucher program in the country. Teacher effectiveness, collective bargaining, charter school. But we just said, we believe this is best for children. What do you believe is best for children? And until we fundamentally have that discussion and force that discussion, all we do is fall into the abyss, because teachers are great about this. How many of you have ever heard this statement? what's good for teachers is good for students. You heard that? These are the same unions that say teachers aren't in it for the money. So my answer is, if you aren't in it for money and you aren't in it for all this power and glory, then shouldn't the motto be what's good for children is good for teachers? And we have to fundamentally change that discussion, and you don't do it, again, you don't do it in the State House. You got to do it out in the field, and you got to face them.
I would just quickly add that at some point when you're moving legislation through, especially when you have the kind of resistance you'll have with the California Teachers Association, you've got to have a governor that is willing to not say, I support you, I'm behind you, but is willing to lead. And you know, Governor Otter and I, we had a heart-to-heart conversation, just the two of us, behind closed doors, and we said, okay, we're going to do this. And then we said, don't blink. And there were a few times when we got back behind that closed door and said, oh my goodness, Governor, don't blink. And he said, don't blink, Tom, because the pressure was huge. And we got this to, I would say, about the 98-yard line. And then I had to hand the ball to the governor to get it across the goal line, because it took him and his influence with the certain legislators to get this done. So if you don't have a governor like Mitch Daniels or Butch Otter or these other governors, then that's it's going to be a difficult task. I don't want to tell you it's hopeless, but I don't think we would have gotten done what we did in Idaho without Butch Otter as our governor. So.
Governor Daniels spent 16 of 31 minutes of his State of the State speech on education reform last year.
Okay,
He laid a marker in the sand.
All right, we've got 4 minutes, so let's try to get to the 3 people up there. So you ask everybody to be very brief and to the point.
My name is Hugh Blackwell. I'm a member of the North Carolina House. I want to try to quickly ask you about 2 things relating to teacher evaluation. One is, to what extent do you all provide for or allow for student and parent evaluations in that process? Secondly, one of you made reference to the possibility of a teacher getting up to an $8,000 bump in pay or bonus for excellent performance. As a part of this evaluation process, for example, in North Carolina, we provide about 2/3 of the funds for operating our local schools. But the local school has to enforce this evaluation instrument they call. How do you deal with the fact that they're spending our state money? How do you, from the state level, ensure that the evaluation system is not used by principals and superintendents to keep the peace locally by passing out higher evaluations than might be indicated, especially if the money's coming from the state?
Go back to linking your building performance and your professional performance. It's a correlation.
The first part was when you brought up, will the parents and students be able to be a part of the teacher evaluation system? Well, they're not a part of that process in Illinois, but what we did was we created the Survey of Learning Conditions, which is a form that the students and the parents will be able to complete on their school every other year, and it will be housed by our state superintendent, and we're targeting the lowest underperforming schools first. And the second thing that we did was we modified our school report card so that parents have consistent notification of the teachers in the building, how many days they've missed, now related to teacher professional development, and some other things there with the report card that we think will also help our parents and students become more involved and more engaged in the actual overall profession of teaching.
So in Idaho, specifically, 50% of a teacher's performance evaluation now is tied to student academic growth, and parental input has to be part of the teacher's performance evaluation. What we realized, is this all is focusing on the fact that teachers aren't the problem, teachers are the solution. And so we have a current education system that makes it almost impossible to financially reward great teachers and impossible to deal with poor teaching. If you're truly going to have an education system that puts students first, you have to remove the barriers to both. Because we know that a child needs a highly qualified, highly effective teacher every year they're in school if we're going to have an effective education system. So our system really, although those who are opposed try to say this is all blaming everything on teachers, beating up teachers, This is focusing on the fact that we realize that teachers are the most important factor, and we have to have policies and incentives and rewards that agree with that statement.
Just Massachusetts is the only state that does collect student data. All right, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jerry Human, Jackson Human Foundation. I want to talk about teacher certification. Can the local district determine the criteria for teacher certification and then for recertification, and if not, why not?
Do you want me to answer this question? Well, states decide what teachers have to do to keep their license in good order, but there's some pressure from districts that are trying to get rid of having to earn a master's degree, things like that, that they're trying to get states to change their regs, and not always successfully because higher ed and state departments of ed tend to be kind of chummy.
No, we are not. I don't know why we do certification, frankly. Okay, I think it's a rather nonsensical practice. I came from a career and technical education background. I was CTE principal, and you know, we don't have schools of education that teach welding education. Right. We go out and find a really good welder who has a background working with children in Little League, churches, what have you, and we put them through the necessary pedagogy to teach welding in our... I don't know why we can't do that for mathematicians, chemists, physicists, and other folks. So this whole issue of certification goes back to the question from the legislator from Montana. I think you rate the colleges that these teachers come from based on their student performance. You rate them from first to worst, or you rate them A, B, C, D, F. And I think you got to get out of the certification business. I think we hire great professionals, and if they don't perform well, we either try to fix them or we help them find a new line of business.